Hello, my name is Jessica McKean. Besides earning my master's degree, I manage online education for Alliant International University.
Hi, I'm Diane Reese, an instructional designer and a student in the Educational Technology Master's program at San Diego State University.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Price, a part-time graduate student in educational technology at San Diego State University. I work full-time for McGraw-Hill Higher Education as a developmental editor for college texts and online course materials.
Hi, I'm Paulette Wilkinson. Besides working toward a master's degree, I'm a rapid e-learning producer at NetApp, currently listed as one of Fortune magazine's top 5 places to work.
My name is Perry Yee. I am currently a full-time graduate student here at San Diego State University, and I am enrolled in the master's program.
After much discussion about the role of games in education, our team narrowed down the research topic to discover whether or not using online games to teach nutrition in a special education classroom was a viable solution. A middle school special education teacher allowed us to conduct research in her classroom as well as collect a parent survey. Our research subjects consisted of 5 students. Of them, 4 were male. 1 was in 6th grade and 4 were in the 7th grade. The disabilities included 3 with autism spectrum disorder, 1 with Moonke syndrome, and 1 with multiple learning disabilities. Each student was on a different cognitive level, ranging from unable to read to able to read but below grade level. Through teacher conversations and the parent survey, we found that all students regularly play video games in the classroom and in their homes.
Students were asked to play online computer games designed to teach children about nutrition and food. Our group compiled a fairly extensive list of available games, and we decided on 2 of them. Supermarket Mania is a game where students guide a character that they choose through aisles in the supermarket by taking tickets from a machine. The object is to collect all the foods necessary for a meal and get to the checkout line first. During the game, students will be asked questions about food and distinguishing if a food was processed in a factory or if it comes from a farm. The next game is the Food Groups game. In this game, students are given a variety of foods and instructed to drag and drop the food into the correct group. If the student correctly matches the food to the food group, it will remain in the circle. If not, the food will snap back to its original location. All foods correspond to only one group, so once a group is completely filled, it is highlighted by a dancing animation and is no longer selectable. The game ends when all foods have been correctly sorted. A parental consent form was created for parents or guardians to sign in order to give consent to let their children participate in their study. In addition, parents or guardians were also given a survey available both online and in print. The survey was created to determine the student's history and preferences for computer or video games at home. We conducted 3 informal discussion sessions with each student. The first session was prior to any gameplay to get a feel for what the student liked, disliked, and thought about computer or video games in general. The second and third sessions took place immediately following any game sessions to determine what the student thought about the game. To account for the baseline nutrition knowledge for each student, a general pre-test and post-test were administered daily. For these pre- and post-tests, we created 30 note cards with images of food items. We also created 2 labels for healthy and unhealthy. We chose 5 cards and asked the student to decide if a food was healthy or unhealthy by placing the card under the corresponding sign. For Supermarket Mania, we presented the student with 2 drawn images of a factory and a farm. Using the food cards, the student was tasked to identify a food and tell us if it was processed in a factory or if it came from a farm. For the Food Groups game, we presented the student with plates that represented the food groups found in the game. We gave the student 10 food cards and asked them to sort each card into the appropriate food group. To record observations during game sessions, we used observation forms with an adapted coding scheme normally used to detect usability and problems in computer games for children. Observers tallied markings for actions, utterances, and nonverbal behaviors. We also conducted a small focus group to showcase a real-world test for the students. We brought in actual food and asked them questions similar to those found in the pre- and post-tests or game sessions. Finally, we talked with the teacher and aides about game design and individual student performance, as well as recommendations for future discussions, assessments, class curriculum, and learning models specifically geared towards students with special educational needs.
The findings from the parent survey show that the students in our study are experienced gamers. They all play online games for fun at home, and most of them are able to do so independently. They play games most days of the week at home and in the classroom. Desktop computers are most often used by the students in our study, but the majority have experience with tablets, touchscreens, controllers, and other gaming devices. Parents reported audio and rich visual detail as the most important game features for their children. The students' favorite games varied, as did the typical duration of gaming sessions. Observation of gameplay in the classroom provided data about the students and the appropriateness of the games chosen for the study. The overall differences between the students' experience with the two games were not statistically significant, but several points of comparison can be noted. Supermarket Mania took longer for students to play through a round. The mean time used was greater than the typical gameplay session noted by parents for some students in the study population. More students successfully completed a round of the food groups game compared with Supermarket Mania. In addition, if one looks at the frequency of observed actions and behaviors that indicate students have difficulty with the game, both the total and mean were higher for Supermarket Mania than for the food groups game. Actions and behaviors indicating difficulty were noted using the observation coding scheme and included things like problems in execution, frustration, impatience, and needing assistance to continue. Findings from the knowledge pre-test and post-test showed a small positive trend in the scores for Supermarket Mania, but the finding was not statistically significant. There was no significant improvement in scores after students played either game one time. All the students were challenged by lack of background nutrition knowledge. Most thought Supermarket Mania was too difficult and too slow. Positive comments related to the setting and scenario of the game and the use of avatars. Students were more successful with the food groups game, but most still found some questions to be ambiguous or difficult, and half expressed dislike for the unrealistic cartoony food images. The majority of students disliked negative feedback in both games. Observation and discussion with students also highlighted the variation in even our small study population in terms of both ability and game preferences. The classroom teacher and aides confirmed the broad range of abilities and learning challenges for students in the class.
The primary factors that influenced our study included the sample size and type, time constraints, the students' variety of abilities, game selection, and distractions. Our team came up with these topics for further study. Identify the game characteristics that are most appropriate for students with special educational needs. Determine best practices for linking games and classroom content. Discover the advantages and disadvantages of different delivery methods, including touch screens. Ascertain the most appropriate forms of feedback in terms of type and delivery, as well as the impact of positive versus negative prompts. And identify game and setting strategies for limiting distractions and excess cognitive load for students with special educational needs. Research-based online games for students with special educational needs are currently lacking. Based on the review conducted for this study, we concluded that most off-the-shelf online games for nutrition have serious design or content drawbacks. Many of the games are not well designed from a game perspective and deliver little or questionable nutrition information. In terms of selecting or designing games for students with special educational needs, recommendations from this study include the following game characteristics. Provide selectable levels of game difficulty and/or a branching adaptive framework. Include scaffolding and sub-goals to guide students and help provide opportunities for early success in any game. Deliver immediate, specific, high-quality feedback that is positive in tone and incorporates media. Add quality audio and graphics, and incorporate an immersive storyline.
So what are our conclusions? Computer games are appropriate for this population. We know from our review of the literature that computer-based instruction often works better than live instruction relying on print media for children with ASD. We also know that computer learning games have been used successfully to teach children with ASD. And we know that these children are experienced gamers. So were the study games appropriate for this population? Well, these games were not designed for children with special educational needs, and it shows. Still, the games had some appealing elements. Supermarket Mania had good graphics, avatar choice, and a familiar grocery store setting that children liked. The Food Groups game had engaging animations tied to game feedback. What about learnability? Well, this is still an open question. We know that differences in test scores before and after games were not statistically significant, but these games might be useful given a different context. We don't know the impact of repetitive gameplay or supporting lessons. The games had many flaws, but we learned from these. The take-home is that game balance is critical. There needs to be a lot more instruction in instructional games for this population, and it needs to be provided with high-quality feedback. There has to be challenge, but these children have to sense that it's possible to succeed. Otherwise, they lose interest, and worse, they lose confidence. What should an ideal learning game include? Well, universally designed learning elements that can reach all learners regardless of their skill level, personalizable interfaces and content to accommodate the variety of learning challenges and strengths that these students have. And finally, when we put the instruction back in instructional games for these children, we have to remember to keep the fun.